Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with, I think this is the second of my catch-up wrap-ups. I will link all of the videos and people that I mentioned down below. I will also put content warnings for all these books, and I think I'm gonna be, these clips are gonna be all out of order, because that's just what's been working for me with filming time lately. So sorry if that's distracting, but let's just get into the books. So the first book I finished was As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zulfa Katu. This was the discussion book for my Not a Genre book club, and my friend Hannah from Bell Gansen Books was the guest and the discussion leader. I will link that below, as well as Hannah's blog. This was a reread for Hannah, but it was the first time I had read it, and this is so incredible. Yeah, I can absolutely see why it made so many people's favorites list. I think it came out last year, the year before. So this is set during the Syrian Revolution. Our main character is Salama, and she was training as a pharmacy student when the revolution started. And even though she was absolutely not trained as a doctor or a surgeon or anything, she is one of the only people who has any kind of medical knowledge or training. And so she has been pulled into helping at a hospital nearby, and so she spends her days trying her absolute best to save and help as many people as she possibly can, even though they are really struggling with supplies for medical care and also just for basic survival. And we know from very early on that almost all of Salama's family died in the first days of the revolution, and so the only person that she has left is her sister-in-law Layla, who is very, very close to having her baby. And also Salama's PTSD has taken a physical form. It is manifested as this being or person named Kauf, and Kauf is really pressuring Salama and threatening her and basically trying to force her to take Layla and get out of the country, to pay somebody to get them out, to help them escape so that they can seek refuge in another country. And Salama is really torn because she cares about what she does. She deeply wants to help people and to continue saving their lives. She feels this huge responsibility of doing what she can to help people because, again, she is one of the only people who can do any kind of medical care, and she sees every day how short-staffed they are. And so she feels this responsibility to stay, and also this deep love and pull for her country. She doesn't want to leave Syria, nobody wants to leave their homeland if they have any other choice. But at the same time, she is really worried for Layla, and she made a promise to her brother that she was going to keep Layla safe, and so she feels like she can't make the decision to stay because that would also put Layla and her baby at risk. And this book is so well done and obviously very emotional, very intense, but it is so beautiful, and it's a really warm book as well. It does deal very heavily with the horrible things that are done to the Syrian people during the revolution, so it doesn't gloss over those things, but there is also this light, this hope of humanity and of better things to come and of compassion. And the characterization of this book is so, so good because I feel like even the characters that you don't agree with or that you don't like, you understand why they do the things they're doing, and especially when people are put in these situations and they are given these horrible options. And we also see how being responsible for other people also complicates this. Salama ends up crossing paths with this young man who actually her and her family have kind of a connection to, and she starts to really care about him, and she starts thinking about what could have been, if things weren't happening this way. And that also starts to complicate her feelings about whether to stay or whether to go. This book is so good. Yeah, like I was saying, the characterization is excellent. I loved and felt for Salama so much, and it's just, your heart hurts for these horrible choices that she is constantly being forced to make, and seeing the things that she has to witness in the hospital, seeing the things that other people are enduring. It's a lot, and we see the impact of this PTSD on these different characters. The writing of this is also really excellent. It's very poetic, and there are some lines that just really, really hit you. And even though the writing is very beautiful, I don't feel like that overshadows the characterization or the serious things that this book is dealing with and talking about. And that element of the book, the themes and the ideas, is so effective. One of the things the book deals with a lot is like perception and knowledge, and the idea of raising awareness and just like letting people outside a country know what's going on. Like there's a lot of parallels in this book to things happening in Palestine right now, which is also something that Hannah and I discussed in the live show. And even like word choice, like one of the words that gets used a lot for like various conflicts, especially in the Middle East, is like unrest, which is such a like sneakily judgmental word, because it sort of suggests that like, well, if everyone would just get along, none of this would happen. Like, why are these oppressed people making such a fuss, you know? And I think that is something that this book deals with and talks about in a way that is really interesting and, again, very powerful. The, like, character relationships and interactions were done really well. There is a bit of a romance in this, and we also see how important Salama's Muslim faith is to her and the way that that can pull her through, but also, like, it's done in a way that doesn't undercut the things that are happening. Like, I think sometimes maybe people who are not particularly religious themselves, they look at people who are, and it's almost like, well, so then I guess you think everything is fine all the time. Like, if you are believing in or hoping for some kind of life after this one, then like, what's the big deal, you know? And that's not the case. And I really like the way that Salama's religion is incorporated into the story. I also think that the characterization of family in particular in this book was so beautiful and heartbreaking. Like I said, we know from basically the beginning of the book that almost all of Salama's family has died, and yet even knowing that, I get so attached to those glimpses, those memories that we see of her and her parents, her and her brother. Anyway, I am starting to lose my voice. So I'm gonna like wrap up with this book, but yeah, I gave As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow 5 stars. It was a lot, but it was so good. I'm so glad I finally read it. Next, I finished 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and the translator of this edition, translated from the Spanish by Gregory Rabasa. So this was for our Past It Classics book club that I run with Julia from Shakespeare and Such and Taylor from Page Screen Taylor. I will link our live show and both of them down below. This was a great discussion. Not a great book, in my opinion. I know that this is a beloved book for a lot of people. It just really didn't work for me. The sort of overall premise is like we're following like the rise and fall of this mythical town of Macondo through the history of the Buendia family. And so we see, I just took that from the back of the book, but that is a good way to sum it up. So we're following this family and their, I guess, trials and tribulations, how that really affects the town as well, and also how that fits into the like larger political and like military things that are happening in Colombia, which is where this book is set. Yeah, so there were a couple of little things that I did like, so I'll start with those. The writing is often very beautiful. I can see why people really like this author's prose. I think, you know, it's very descriptive, it's very evocative. I also think that some of the ideas, or not even, I don't know if I would even say the ideas of this book, because I'm not even sure that that was the focus the author was going for, but I guess there were some elements of the story that I think could have been interesting ideas, like related to the like commentary of things that were happening like in this time period, for example, although this is magical realism, so it's not meant to be like strictly historical. Other than that though, I had an absolutely terrible time reading this. It was very fortunate that I had access to the audiobook, because I would not have been able to get through this otherwise. Yeah, I think I read the first 100 or so pages physically, and then after that I switched to the audio, and that's how I finished the rest of this 500-page book. I'm gonna save the biggest issue for last, but basically nothing about this really worked for me. Like, aside from those little things I mentioned at the beginning, which even those I'm not completely convinced of, yeah, other than those, really nothing about this I think was effective or enjoyable in any way. For one thing, I mentioned this book is 500 pages. I really don't think it needs to be. It is so incredibly slow and drawn out, and like nothing happens. Like, it's like supposed to be like a character study, like a character and setting study, I think. But I don't think the characterization is strong enough or likable enough, which I'll get to later, to like carry that weight of this long book. And I also don't think that the things that it's like trying to do with the setting are enough. Like, yes, the town was kind of interesting, but a lot of the sort of plot threads connected to this town really just did not interest me. And again, everything was just so slow. And the things that do happen in this book are often like spread out with so much kind of filler, it felt like, that even when there was something happening, it took way too long between things to happen. And also something I kind of mentioned earlier is that even the things that I think almost like wanted to be themes of this book or could have been, I just don't think there was enough actual commentary there. Like, for example, the kind of discussion of the military like takeovers or the different like political parties that were in power and everything. Like, the discussion of that I think could have been incredibly interesting and insightful. And like, obviously I'm not trying to like say that the author doesn't know how to write about his own country. That's not what I mean. But like, in terms of this story that he has chosen to tell, I feel like he was pointing us to themes or ideas or things that were going to be critiqued or commented on, and then that part just never happened. Like, I really don't think this book ultimately said anything about the I mean, I guess in a way it did sort of criticize the cruelty of various people in positions of power, but even that is, I think, undercut by some other things that I'll talk about. And that sort of points to a larger like issue I had with this book, which is that I don't think I don't know what its intention was. And every time I say that, I feel like I have to explain that I don't mean that every book has to have like a neat moral at the end of it, or that there has to be a very specific, strong resolution to a problem in the book. That's not what I mean. I mean that like stories have a reason for existing. You know, there's a reason the author wanted to tell this story or did tell this story. And with this one, I just don't know what it is. Like, I get to the end and it feels like such a waste. Such a waste of like 500 pages and 100 years and so much suffering. So much suffering of reading this book. And then finally, the biggest issue that I had with this book is something that connects to what I was saying about like the themes and what I feel is the lack of critique or commentary. And it's also connected to the characters. As I said, I think this book is like so slow and rambly and drawn out that it kind of had to be a character study, but I don't think it succeeded as one because the characters themselves are absolutely despicable, and not in a way that I think is like always intentional. And obviously you don't have to like every character and you don't have to agree with every decision they make, but I think it's not unreasonable to want to have like somebody in a story that you can root for, that you can care about, that you can want to see succeed in some way. And that did not happen in this book. Like, there was maybe like 2 characters in the entire thing that were more likable or interesting for the most part. Everybody else was absolutely horrible, and I'm going to get into spoilers for this part because I have to like talk about the specifics of why this was absolutely disgusting. So just be warned. Also, if you're watching this with kids in the room, maybe be warned about that as well. So one of the primary characters in this family, who we are supposed to be invested in and we are supposed to care about and we are supposed to like, he becomes completely obsessed with this 9-year-old girl, and he is so desperate to marry her and have sex with her that he goes to her parents and is like, I need to marry your daughter. And they're like, well, we have other daughters who are like older and, you know, actual adults or like closer to being adults. And he's like, no, it has to be that one. And they're like, okay, well, I guess that's fine, but she hasn't gotten her period yet, so we're gonna, like, until that happens, you can't. But then it's fine, then you can marry her. Again, 9-year-old girl. So they wait, I guess, until she does in fact get her period. And just to like really emphasize how young this child is, Not only do we know that she is 9 years old, that she hasn't even hit puberty at the point that this man is so desperate to fuck her, but also, like, she has to be trained out of wetting the bed before she can go off and live with her husband. And also, again, to emphasize how young this child is, she brings her dolls with her to his house. This grown-ass man who is so obsessed with having sex with this 9-year-old girl. But he gets what he wants. He gets to marry her. He gets to have sex with this child, repeatedly. And he's happy, you know, for a few years until she dies from horrible pregnancy complications, because guess what? A literal child cannot safely have children. So that is like one of the heroes of this book, one of the people that we are supposed to like at this point in the story and later on. And again, I'm not asking for every single character to be likable, but I really feel that we were not supposed to hate this man. But I did. To the point that, like, the beginning of the book opens with him facing a firing squad. And by the time we get to this whole thing with this, like, 9-year-old child that he's so desperate to sexually assault, by the time we get to that point, it's like, do it then. You know, like, the book is trying to make us, like, afraid for him because we know that he ends up in front of a firing squad. And I'm like, do it. Like, that is, I don't think, the experience we're supposed to have following this character. And again, he's one of the main characters in the story. So that's, like, absolutely disgusting. And also the fact that, like, nobody else in the family sees anything wrong with what he did. Like, the closest they get is like, oh man, that's so sad that she died. She was, like, such a positive little person to have around the house. Nobody at all bothered by what happened. Like, there is so much pedophilia and sexual abuse of children and incest in this book. Like, it's a lot. It's exhausting. I even said in my Goodreads review that, like, it's a bad sign when you're reading a book and you get to an incest plot line and you're like, another one? Like, there's like 3 different incestuous relationships in this book, and the way that those are talked about is incredibly weird. And also, again, often a violation of consent. One of the things that is so, like, disgusting about that, like, the things themselves are bad enough, but also it's the complete apathy from all the other characters, and it kind of feels like from the story itself. Like, I'm not saying that the author doesn't think there's anything wrong with those things. That's not what I mean. But, like, these things are not being commented on. They're not being handled in a way that has any kind of compassion or understanding of how horrible these things are. It's just, like, thrown in for not even shock value, because I don't even think that we're supposed to be shocked, like, judging by the reactions or non-reactions of the other characters. It's just kind of thrown in there and is not dealt with at all, ever. Not criticized, ever. In fact, there's, like, quite a few points where it sort of feels like we're supposed to be on board with it, or we're supposed to be, like, sympathetic to it. I guess you could argue that given the way the book ends and sort of, like, what comes of this, like, family dynasty almost, I guess you could argue that where that ends is kind of criticizing the things that these characters do. But if that's the case, then that is very well buried in the story. Even though I did mention that there are some parts of the writing that are really lovely, there's also a lot of parts that aren't. Like, there is a part near the very, very end of the book. This is one of the incestuous and also non-consensual relationships. There is a sex scene near the very end of the book where the female character is described, and this is supposed to be, like, sexy or appealing. The way that, like, her body or her, like, sexuality is described is a slippery, fragrant weasel. And that's, like, the word weasel for her, like, sexiness specifically is used 3 times. So why? Like, I have so many questions about this book and about what it was trying to do. The last thing I want to say is regarding all of these, like, really horrible things in this book that specifically are not handled well, because that's the thing. I frequently read and enjoy or appreciate books that deal with difficult subject matter, but it has to deal with it, you know, and this book doesn't. So the other thing I was going to say about that is that I feel like this book really exemplifies the fact that those things, those like problematic is too weak of a word, but those like problematic or terrible things in stories, they also bleed into your experience with the actual construction of the story. Like personally, I feel like somebody being like, I hated this book because these terrible things were handled really poorly, I think that's a fair assessment in itself. I don't feel like you need to like back that statement up with like, I don't know, more objective criticisms. But I do think that a lot of times those criticisms really overlap with stories that handle material like this really badly. Like in this one, for example, it's not just like these disgusting things are completely brushed over by the story, or even like romanticized by the story. Like a lot of the incest specifically is really romanticized. So it's not just like the way those things were handled, but that really affects how you feel about the actual storytelling, like the plot and the characters. Because like I was saying, this book kind of had to be a character study because I don't think the plot is there enough or interesting enough for it to be something else. So it was like leaning on its characters to carry the story. But when all of the characters are such, like, at least like the main ones, most of the main ones, when they are just such absolutely abhorrent human beings and you don't care what happens to them, you don't want to follow them, you don't understand why they are doing these things, why nobody else has a problem with these things, like, that really affects how you feel about the actual characterization in this book. So it's not just like offensive, it's like also affecting the effectiveness, I guess, of the book. Anyway, I hated this. I gave 100 Years of Solitude 1.5 stars because there were those tiny few things that I liked, but honestly, I don't know if I can make myself do that. This might be a flat 1 star. One of the main reasons that I had to refilm this like segment of my wrap up is because I was trying to review this book. I like filmed sort of a review section, but I was so like incandescent with rage that I was not coherent. Hopefully I was a little more coherent this time around, but yeah, I hated this. I can't wait to get this book out of my house. Next, I finished Protecting Her Heart by Nancy Campbell Allen. This is the third and I think final book in a series of proper romance companion books. I did receive this one as an ARC and I have a full review on it, so I will link that below. But basically, this might be my favorite in the series. I really, really enjoyed it. We are following Charlotte and John as our two main characters, and they have been friends for quite a while. They're also in sort of the same overlapping friend group that also includes the couples of the previous books, and they're really close. They're best friends. They know each other very well. And at the beginning of the book, Charlotte gets news that her father is very, very sick. She is at this point studying in America at one of the medical schools there, and so she gets this news. She drops everything, she goes back as soon as she can, but when she gets there, her father has already passed away, and he leaves a very mysterious letter that seems to allude to, he's basically apologizing for getting her caught up in these secrets and this possibly dangerous secret, and she doesn't know what he's talking about, so she starts trying to figure that out, and she starts thinking that it maybe has something to do with her mother, and then of course John also is helping her, and they're spending a lot more time together, and they're starting to realize that maybe they have other feelings for each other besides just friendship. Yeah, like I said, this might be my favorite in the series because I really enjoyed both our protagonists. I thought the developing romance was done really well, even though you guys know I'm a harder sell on friends to lovers than I am with a lot of other tropes. I really, really like the way that these books like center women who are good at their jobs, you know, like they're pursuing careers, but they also are wanting to find love, and how you can have both of those things. I really like the way this book dealt with the potential difficulty of Charlotte trying to pursue a romantic relationship when at this time, like the hospitals in, like a lot of the big hospitals in London, it's like you couldn't work for them if you were a married woman. Like you could only work for them if you were a single woman, assuming you got the job at all. And so I really like the way this book handled that and kind of the compromise or the resolution of that at the end. I think the mystery element of this one might be my favorite. I really liked the way that was done. So yeah, 4.5 stars, maybe even a 5. I thought this was really great. Next, I finished Island of Whispers by Frances Harding, illustrated by Emily Gravett. And I will give you a little glimpse of the like illustration and design style. Lots of blues and grays, and it's so beautiful, and I think it fit the story and the tone of the story perfectly. This was for a sort of mini episode, a reunion episode for me and Hannah from Ball Gowns and Books of our Frances Harding read along. This was also part of my Not a Genre book club, so I will link that live show down below. I love Frances Harding. Like, this is such a beautiful and moving story, and it's also very short, and I think that this could be a really good recommendation for people if you're looking to try Frances Harding and you don't really know where to start. You kind of just want to sample like her writing style and the kinds of stories that she tells, because I think this is a good representation of the things that she does really, really well. Characterization, atmosphere, her really, really wonderful writing style that is beautiful but also a little strange, but it's also never too flowery. I think it really highlights all of those things, plus her incredible creativity without being quite as like weird or bizarre as some of her books can be, which I love, but I understand that they're not quite as accessible to people sometimes. So I think this would be a great place to start if you're looking for one. And this is about our main character Milo, who is this young boy, and his father is the kind of guide for the dead in like his island community, and he sort of like leads their spirits to pass on. But then very suddenly Milo actually ends up being sort of pushed into taking this role, and he always thought that he wasn't going to be good at it because there's these rules for how you're supposed to interact with the dead. Like, you're not supposed to look at them, you're certainly not supposed to talk to them, like you're basically not supposed to engage with them, and Milo does. Like, that's just, it's something he has a really hard time stopping himself from doing. And so on top of this unexpected thing, Milo getting pushed into this job when he really doesn't think he's ready, he's also being pursued by this lord who is really angry and hurting and grieving because his daughter died recently, and he's demanding that basically they give her back, like that they give her shoes back specifically, because that is like tied to the spirits being able to move on, and he's insisting that she's not really dead, or that they can fix it, they can bring her back, even though that's not the way that things work. Yeah, this is so beautiful. Again, please check out our live show, but Hannah and I really, really loved this. I think that the way it deals with grief in this fantasy setting is so heartfelt and so beautiful. I adore Milo with my whole heart. Like, I always love Frances Harding's main characters, and Milo is no exception. He is just so strong and good, and like, just, he's very quietly brave, and he has such a good heart, and I loved him. I loved him so much. I wanted only good things for him, and I love the way that his sort of character arc, and kind of one of the, I think probably the main message of the story, besides that everybody matters, that everyone has a story to tell. Kindness is not weakness. To be kind in this unkind world is walking through a battlefield without armor or sword. It takes courage and strength to be kind. I think that is such a beautiful idea, and I think it's really, really shown in the story and in the characters, and like, I love this book so much. I think that the atmosphere and sort of the creepiness of it is done well, although it's not like the focus of the story. Like, this isn't as like spooky as some of her books can be, but there are certainly like moments or characters that are, and I think that was effective. I just love the emotional impact of this story. Like, it's so short, but it still brought me to tears. Like, the way that it deals with grief and the different ways that people can deal with it or really not deal with it. And especially it touches on the grief of losing somebody that you missed opportunities with, like that you could have been closer and you weren't. It's such a beautiful book. I feel like I'm rambling so much, especially considering how short this book is. But I loved it. I give it 5 stars. Yeah, like, I love Frances Harding, and I think this might be in like the upper tier of her books for me. So good. Next, I finished One Crazy Summer by Rita Williams Garcia. This was actually a reread for me. This is the first book in the Gaither Sisters series. And the first time I read this physically. This time I listened to it on audio, and I would highly recommend either of those that you prefer, because both of those were great experiences. The narrator was Cece Aisha Johnson, who did a fantastic job. I loved the way she narrated for our main character, who is Delphine. And I just was so impressed with the different like accent and like character choices that she made, because there's like a lot of very distinct characters and like character voices and accents, and it was just fantastic. So we are following Delphine as our narrator, and she is the oldest of 3 sisters, and they are being sent to stay with their estranged mother for the summer. This is set in, is it 1968, I think, in Oakland. So they haven't seen their mother since they were very, very young. Like Fern, actually, who is the youngest daughter, she was just a baby when her mother left. So the 3 of them really don't have any knowledge about her or any kind of connection, but they're staying with her for the whole summer, and their mother is not terribly happy about that. She is a printer and activist, and she has some connections with the Black Panthers, and so she decides that to try and get the 3 of them out of her way, that they're going to attend the Black Panther summer camp. And so that is a big piece of the story, and just like seeing the 3 girls try to navigate this incredibly complicated and like messy and difficult relationship with this mother who left them, but who they are maybe starting to understand a little bit, even if they don't always like what they know. I loved this so much. This second read officially put Delphine on my favorite characters list. I adore her so much. She is so incredibly smart and loving and like funny, and the way that she cares for her sisters and the way that she bosses them around for their own good, like I love Delphine so much. And I think that even though the book does a really, really good job of helping you kind of understand, even if you don't agree or even if you don't like it, I think you can kind of understand why their mother would make the decisions that she did, which doesn't excuse them, but I do think that you can kind of see why she would do these things. So even though that is the case, I was so upset on these girls' behalf, especially Delphine, because we are in her head, and so we know how this has affected her and how she's kind of had to mother her 2 younger sisters when she shouldn't have had to. I love Delphine. I love Delphine so much. And I also really loved just the family dynamics in general. Like the relationship between these 3 sisters is so funny and so believable to me. Like if you have siblings, I feel like you will probably recognize some of the dynamics here. I think the writing of this book is just really, really effortless. Like there's also a huge amount of humor. Like I feel like a lot of times when I talk about this series, I talk about how well it deals with like themes and with these like, you know, big ideas, and it definitely does. I think the way that it talks about the Black Panther movement and the perception of that versus what they were actually doing, the way it deals with these really complicated family relationships, and the way it deals with bigotry and prejudice and like making judgments about people, like all of that is brilliant. And also these books are hilarious, like the back and forth between the sisters, or between them and their mother, between them and some of the other kids their age. It's just so funny. And so I think that plus Rita Williams Garcia's really effortless and light writing style, I think that really balances out the heavier moments of the story. So even though like there are serious things happening or that you hear about, and those things are taken seriously, it still doesn't feel like a really heavy reading experience. So anyway, I loved this again just as much the second time, if not more. And I gave One Crazy Summer 5 stars. Next, I finished The Curse of Chalion by Lois McMaster Bujold. This is the first book in a companion series, and it's also my first book by this author. I'm very excited to have finally read her. Like, as a fantasy lover, I feel like it was high time. And I actually read this for a reading vlog project, like a sort of swap that I did with my friend Mariana Mas Books. So I will link her below as well as her video. So if you want to see what book I recommended to her, you can watch that. And yeah, I'll link my vlog for this as well, of course. And I don't want to get into too many details because obviously I like talked through all my thoughts for this book in its own video. But long story short, I loved this. I loved this for the reasons that Mariana expected, which like a lot of it is about like the world building and the characters and how just genuinely good the main characters are, which is something that Mariana and I have talked a lot about how like impressive it is when authors can write a truly good protagonist who also still grows and learns and struggles. It's definitely possible. Like, you don't always have to have an anti-hero to have great characterization. I thought the world building and the like religious elements were incredibly well done and interesting, and like I don't know, I talked about this in the vlog. It's like I'm right at the border between a 4.5 and a 5 stars because there were a couple of tiny things that didn't completely work for me, but I loved everything else so much, and I also loved the ending so much. It was so like fulfilling and satisfying that I don't know, I might bump this up to 5 stars later, but this was excellent. Next, I finished A Lady's Guide to Marvels and Misadventure by Angela Bell. I was kindly sent a copy of this as an ARC, and I just don't have it with me right now, so I will put that picture up. But I will link the review for this if you would like more thoughts. But this is a sort of like retelling or reinterpretation of the Nutcracker of that story, and we are following our main character, Clara, who her family has kind of been at the center of a lot of rumors about the fact that madness might run in their family, which is very dangerous for their like safety, because if people decided that you were mad, then they could just like shut you up in one of those horrible asylums. So the stakes are pretty high, and it's also connected to the grief of losing her uncle, and how that has affected the family. And then our male lead, he ends up getting hired by Clara's grandfather, Drosselmeyer, at his like clock or like mechanics shop, and Clara doesn't trust him because of, like, for understandable reasons, I think, some really horrible things that she experienced with the previous man that she got close to. And then one day her grandfather just sort of disappears, and he leaves a note that sends Clara and this young man, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name right now, on a scavenger hunt where they're going to different European cities, and he like leaves them these clues, and it's the two of them and also Clara's mother. This was kind of a mixed experience for me. I think I ended up settling on 3 stars because there were things I enjoyed about it. I liked Clara as a main character, and I thought that her characterization was really well done and it made a lot of sense. I loved how important her family was to her, and I found her difficulty in trusting people again, especially young men. I found that very believable. I really love her fierce loyalty, and then also though how she kind of starts to realize that can sometimes lead her to shut out other people. So I thought Clara was interesting. I actually really liked the traveling aspect, which I don't often do in books. I really enjoyed these glimpses of different cities, but the reason that I didn't have like the best time with this book, even though I really wanted to, a lot of it comes down to 2 pretty significant elements in the story not working for me, and one of those was the romance. Like, it was fine. I liked the characters well enough separately, especially Clara. I really liked Clara. And I thought that some of their conversations were interesting. I liked seeing the two of them kind of realize that they had judged the other person unfairly. Like, I liked sort of the mechanics of these 2 characters, like, getting to know each other, but I didn't really feel like the spark between them. I really wasn't super interested in the romance. And then the other big thing is the use of like religious elements in this book really didn't work for me. It felt very heavy-handed, and like I really love well done religious themes in books. I think that can be really interesting. I think it can really add to a story. I just don't always like the way it's done or handled, and this book is kind of one of the examples. So like a mixed experience with this one. There were things that I really liked about it, but yeah, a couple big things that didn't work for me. Next, I finished Another Brooklyn by Jacqueline Woodson, and this one I listened to on audio. The narrator is Robin Miles, and this is such an interesting book because like there's not a lot of plot. It's hard to even describe it because most of the story is not about the plot, but I guess technically the premise is that we are following this main character who is, I guess, a young woman, and she is kind of like thinking back to her days as a young girl living in this particular neighborhood in New York City, and the really tight, deep friendship that she had with these 3 or so other girls, and the things that happened that kind of like separated them later in life. And we kind of get hints about some tragedy or some huge event that happened that was kind of the main catalyst for this separation. So we don't find that out right away, but that is kind of like the through line, is like this like building like tension of like what happened, like why do these girls drift apart. And this is, I love Jacqueline Woodson. She is so talented. This isn't my favorite book by her. I gave it 4 stars, but it's still just incredibly well crafted. Like the way that she can blend like heart and humor and cleverness and bittersweetness in her writing while not ever overwriting is just so impressive. Like she's a very economical writer, and yet all of the words that she chooses are like the perfect words. She also writes stories and characters that just feel very real. And I also think Robin Miles was a great narrator. I think that helped as well. And so even though there are a lot of really difficult things that this book deals with, I think the fact that Jacqueline Woodson writes in a way that doesn't, like, it takes those things seriously, but it doesn't depict them, like, graphically. Sometimes they're not even on page, but we still feel, like, the emotional impact of, like, what happened to these girls, to these characters. So I think that choice, plus her just real lightness in her writing, even her books that do get very heavy don't usually feel like that. I think maybe one of the reasons that I gave this one a 4 instead of higher is, even though I think as like a character study, it's super well written, and I was so invested in these girls, and I loved the friendship. I loved the way that this book pushes back at the idea that girls are catty and they can't be friends and all of that. Like, I love all of those things, but I think that I wanted there to be like a clearer intention, I guess. Like, I don't know if maybe I wanted a little bit stronger of a plot thread or what, but there was just a little something missing, but still really, really well done. Next, I finished Disobedient Bodies by Emma Dabiri. I don't know if this is a subtitle or just like a description on the book. It says, Reclaim Your Unruly Beauty. And this is a very short nonfiction book. I think you technically could call this a longer essay. And I don't think it's published in the US yet. So I ordered this from Blackwell's from the UK. Emma Dabiri is like one of my favorite nonfiction writers, I think officially. She wrote Twisted, The Tangled History of Black Hair Culture. I might have switched those. Or the original title was Don't Touch My Hair. She also wrote What White People Can Do Next, and now this is her most recent one. And I love this so much. Like I said, Emma Dabiri is one of my favorite nonfiction writers, so I did also love this one. And she talks about the concept of beauty and how that intersects with politics, how it intersects with different identities and with capitalism, and with self-love. Sort of sounds like, I don't know, a generic way to put it, which is another thing that she talks about. Like, I just really, really love this. She talks about needing to move beyond these very restrictive ideals of beauty. Not just in terms of like Western beauty standards and how colonialism and racism and all of these other prejudices have influenced what is considered beautiful. Like, she does talk about that, but also about like just like the concept of physical or outward beauty and the way that that can be weaponized and like it shouldn't be. But at the same time, she doesn't criticize like the act of like, I don't know, primping, like taking care of yourself, beautifying yourself. There's like a really great quote actually that I might share at the end. And she like fully admits that like she loves the act of beautifying, you know, of like choosing clothes or makeup or jewelry, and like that is not a bad thing, and that is something that we should celebrate and revel in. And I just think the way that she balanced that with the bigger ideas that she was talking about, and with the critiques of like the beauty industry and all these other things, I just think that is so good. Like the way that she, in like all the nonfiction that I've read from her, but I especially noticed this with her 2 essays, the way that she can make connections between ideas and between topics and between like very tangible things and also like really big ideas and histories. Like, I just think she's brilliant. One of the other things she talks about is like, what is the ultimate goal in terms of true equity? And it made me think of some of the essays in It's Not About the Burqa, because she talks about like, what are we really trying to do when it comes to inclusion and equity? Like when she's talking about, you know, including other body types, for example, in modeling campaigns. Like, it's not that that doesn't mean anything, but our ultimate goal shouldn't be to objectify everybody equally, or like to objectify certain people more. Like, do you know what I mean? Anyway, she's just so smart. I love her. I loved this. I gave Disobedient Bodies 5 stars. While I resent my value being determined solely by the way I look, I've confessed my love of glamour, and there are days when attending to my body, my skin, my hair, my clothing, wearing jewelry and luxuriating in perfumes, body oils, and creams is simply what I want to do. These are all ways to connect with, care for, and enjoy the experience of embodiment. Many of these practices feel intimately linked to a sense of self-care. And while this quote of Audre Lorde has been commodified almost to the point of cliché, the truth of it remains. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And then I think this was the last book I finished. Like I said, these clips are going to be in a different order than I'm filming them in. But I also read Rise of the Jumbies by Tracy Batiste. This is the second book in what I think is a trilogy. It is set in the Caribbean, and I am so glad that I read the sequel. This was a gift from my lovely friend Vendi from Caught Between Pages, so thank you, Vendi. I loved this even more than book one. Like, I liked book one. I think when I read it a few years ago, I gave it like a 3 or a 3.5 stars. So I liked it, but it wasn't like an all-time favorite. But then when Ashley from Bookish Realm was talking about this book specifically, I don't remember if it was like a wrap-up or in one of her Black Mermaid videos, when she was talking about it, I was like, oh, I really need to read this one, that I need to continue the series, because of the way she talked about the different things it deals with. We're following our main character Corinne and a couple of her friends, and as you can probably guess from the cover, this book specifically deals with more like mermaid lore and mythology, and there are children that start going missing, and so Corinne and her friends consult Mama Delo, who is the Jumbi who's in charge of the sea, but she's not somebody you cross, and she's not somebody that you ask for help lightly. And so she and a few other of her friends, or like acquaintances, end up having to go on this massive journey, like through the ocean, to try and get something that Mama Delo wants, which is the only way that she has said that she will help them bring the children back. I partly read this one physically, and then I also partly listened to the audiobook, which was also narrated by Robin Miles. I think that's really kind of interesting or funny that that happened. I think the audio or the physical book is a great way to go. I recommend either of them. I was super impressed with the characterization and accent work from Robin Miles. I thought that was really fantastic. And yeah, like I said, I loved this book even more than the first one. I really, really liked Corinne as a main character and seeing her development. I also was really happy with how the friendship element developed, because that was one of the things I think from the first book that didn't quite hit for me, is I feel like we needed a little bit more like build up or background to like these friendships and these connections. Here that wasn't a problem. I really, really liked the friendships and the new friends that they make, the girls that Corinne meets, and the way that they interact and the way that they very slowly come to trust each other. Like, it's really, really beautiful. And I think that the resolution of those characters' kind of like story or like a story arc was incredibly well done, and just as a whole, the way that this book handled the themes, because this book deals very specifically with slavery, the transatlantic slave trade specifically, and I think it is done in a way that is very mindful of the fact that this book is intended for children, while also not sugarcoating things and not like talking down to the audience. I really loved the kind of folklore elements, or like the world building. I even liked the travel parts, which is like a big chunk of this book, and you guys know I'm very picky about that. And I also think that the antagonists of this book, especially Mama Delo, who, like, is she an antagonist? Is she not? I thought she was incredibly interesting and really, really well characterized, where, like, there were some moments where you almost could, like, understand why she was doing things, and then she'd do something else, and suddenly she was, like, a villain that you love to hate, you know? Anyway, so this was incredible. I gave Rise of the Jumbies 5 stars, and I would definitely recommend this, even if you, like me, maybe didn't completely love the first book. This was so good.